Other load of bad ideas?
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's the kind of thing you say when a celebrity is shouting over you and not letting you talk. So it's not, it requires more discussion than that. And to be fair, that was a context in which it was very hard to have this discussion. But yeah, you know, I can defend that claim. I think that we have an idea here that all of our religions are the same, that they're all equally wise or equally empty or equally irrelevant. And this is obviously devout believers of various religions don't believe this, but secular liberals tend to believe this, and it's just not true. Our religions are quite different, and there are many cases in which, you know, Christianity is worse than Islam if you're going to talk about something like opposition to embryonic stem cell research, because Muslims believe that the soul enters the fetus at day 180 or 120, depending on which hadith you believe. So I would never dream of criticizing Islam on that point, but we have to acknowledge that Islam has doctrines like jihad and martyrdom and death to apostates, which are central to the faith in the way that they aren't in other faiths, and we have to grapple with that, and Muslims have to grapple with that.
And you are an atheist, and the point being for many people is that you can criticize Christianity, no one will call you anti-Christian or anti-American, but if you do the same when it comes to Islam, then you're Islamophobic. I want to get to an article that you wrote. It's called Sleepwalking Toward Armageddon. All right, I'm going to put some of these quotes, and I want you to respond to it. And sort of in the context of what you were talking about what happened on Bill Maher, you said, no doubt many enlightened concerns will come flooding into the reader's mind at this point. I would not want to create the impression that most Muslims support ISIS, nor would I want to give any shelter or inspiration to the hatred of Muslims as people. In drawing a connection between the doctrine of Islam and jihadist violence, I am talking about the ideas and their consequences, not about the 1.5 billion nominal Muslims, many of whom do not take their religion very seriously. Why don't people hear that instead of what they hear about being racist or Islamophobic?
Yeah, well, we have a kind of dogma of political correctness here, which is stifling conversation. Many liberals want to grade Islam on a curve. You know, that we're not expecting the same kind of civility and openness to free speech and other liberties that we hold dear and are right to hold dear from Muslims throughout the world. And so, you know, when cartoonists draw the wrong cartoon and embassies start burning, we criticize the cartoonists, and we criticize the newspapers that printed the cartoons, and we practice self-censorship. There was an academic book at Yale University Press on the cartoon controversy that wouldn't publish the cartoons. This is just madness, and yet it's a double standard that if you actually want to look for racism and bigotry, this is the bigotry of low expectations. This is a kind of racism that, and this point doesn't originate with me. My friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali has made this point many times. And so what we need is the same standard of reasonableness and tolerance applied across the board.
Okay, I want to get to a couple if I can. You said, but there is now a large industry of obfuscation designed to protect Muslims from having to grapple with these truths. Humanities and social science departments are filled with scholars and pseudo-scholars deemed to be experts in terrorism, religion, Islamic jurisprudence, anthropology, political science, and other diverse fields who claim that where Muslim intolerance and violence are concerned, nothing is ever what it seems. And I think you believe that not admitting that there is a problem does more harm than good, mostly to Muslims.
Yeah, well, so what the president wants to say is that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam, and I understand why he has to say that, because it would be too inflammatory given the concern that we are clashing with the Muslim world to speak honestly about this. But clearly ISIS has a lot to do with specific doctrines that are really Muslim doctrines, and the Islamic doctrines. And it's not just the kind of Islam you get at a terrorist training camp in Afghanistan. It's the kind of Islam you get if you simply read the Quran and the Hadith. And so waging jihad against the infidel and killing apostates and taking sex slaves, even this is in the teachings, and it's not peripheral. It is central. And reformist Muslims need to speak honestly about this, and many of them do. People like Majid Nawaz and Irshad Manji. These are people who will not play hide the ball with the articles of faith. They will honestly talk about these problematic doctrines and honestly call other Muslims to figure out a way to contextualize them and put them on the shelf and retire them, frankly. And this is quite a challenge, because we have this idea of revelation that these books were dictated by the creator of the universe. In the case of Islam, it's the Quran. In the case of of Christianity, it's the Bible. And then you are now hostage to the contents of these books, which can't be edited. But happily, the Bible is much easier to cherry pick, and this explains why we can forget about Leviticus and Deuteronomy and so many of the vile passages in there, and why Christians you don't hear any talk among Christians about stoning people for working on the Sabbath. It's easier to do that.
If we get Armstrong Williams back, we'll bring him in as well. So,
with anyone who wants to have a conversation with me. What I am not happy about is anyone who tries to prevent others from hearing that conversation. I'm very happy that that is not taking place tonight, again, thanks to security and USC for doing what they are supposed to do. So, tonight, I want to talk a little bit about your freedoms and why they are under assault. They're under assault from a variety of groups, from motivated thinkers on a bunch of political sides, but most of all, they are under assault from advocates of identity politics, people who believe that their version of social justice should override individual rights. These are the folks who are really dangerous to your rights. Now, to understand the current assault on individual rights, we first have to understand there are two contrasting visions of rights in the United States and in the West generally. So one vision of rights is the negative rights vision. The negative rights vision basically says that rights come from God. They are inalienable, they come from God or nature, as expressed in the Declaration of Independence. They are self-evident, and these are the rights that you would have in a state of nature, meaning you and your family live somewhere without a government. What are the rights that you have as a human being in the absence of a government? So, for example, you have a right to self-defense, you have a right to free speech. Nobody is allowed to actually infringe on those freedoms because in a state of nature, if somebody tried to do that, you would defend yourself from that sort of imposition. Those are negative rights. Then there's another vision of rights. These are positive rights. So positive rights are rights that come from government. The idea is that there are no rights outside of a collective that gives you the right. So if you have a right to property, that's only because the government is letting you have property. If you have a right to free speech, it's only because the government allows you to speak freely. But all rights, in the end, only come from the collective. They only come from government. There are no pre-existing individual rights in a state of nature or anything like that. Negative rights are rights that you have from the intervention of others. Positive rights are rights that you have from the goods and services of others. So, for example, I have a right to defend my own life. I have a right to self-defense. That is a negative right because it's a right to defend my life from the imposition of others. A positive right is the idea that you have a right to walk into my store and demand a service of me. That's a positive right because you really don't have that right in a state of nature. I'd get to make a contract with you. If you chose to make that contract with me, then we'd have a deal. But you don't have a right to my services. Positive rights suggest that you do have a right to stuff from me. So, for example, a right to health care requires that there be a doctor that you can force care from. When people say right to health care, that means a good or service coming from someone who is not you, and your right is an imposition of a duty on someone else. Someone else now has a duty to do something for you that they would not otherwise have a duty to do. The problem is, you see, with positive rights is that they are not self-fulfilling. A right to self-defense is self-fulfilling. Somebody tries to kill me, I defend myself. That is a self-fulfilling right. A positive right is not self-fulfilling. I have a right to health care. Well, what if there's no one who actually wants to take care of me for free? Well then, presumably, because I have positive rights, I get to stick my gun in their face and tell them that they ought to care for me for free. Okay, positive rights are only compulsory. Positive rights are compelled. Positive rights views often conflict with negative rights views, as you can see. I want to defend my life. I want to defend my right to liberty of contract. You want to force me to care for you. So a negative rights view and a positive rights view are now in conflict. The United States is based on negative rights. It is not based on positive rights. The U.S. Constitution is based on negative rights. The Constitution of, say, South Africa is based on positive rights. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man is based on positive rights, like the right to housing, the right to food, the right to medical care. None of this is in the United States Constitution because the Constitution doesn't believe that you have the right to take the collective and use the collective gun against me to force me to give you services. The U.S. Constitution is specifically designed to undercut regimes of positive rights. That's what the Constitution is designed to do. Now, the part of the Constitution nobody talks about, the structural Constitution, the part that matters the most, Articles 1, 2, and 3, and all the rest, all of those articles are all about checks and balances designed to prevent people from leveraging power against you. The idea is that if there's a majority that wants to leverage power against you here, well, there's going to be another majority in the states that are going to stop you. There's a majority in the Senate that will be checked by a majority in the Congress. There's a majority in both houses of Congress that will be checked by the president. Checks and balances were designed to stop tyranny of the majority. This is obvious from the Federalist Papers. It's obvious from the text of the Constitution. It's no surprise then, because the Constitution is based on a philosophy of negative rights, that it has come under dire attack from advocates of positive rights. These positive rights advocates in the United States happen to be on the political left, which makes sense. Many on the left, or leftist philosophy, is not about belief in God, it's about belief in government. It's not about the belief in individuals and rights that accrue to you as individuals. It's about the power of the collective, what we can do together. Right? As Barack Obama said in 2012 at the DNC, as the Democratic National Convention put up on their big platform, the only thing that we all have in common is the government. Now, these positive rights advocates in the United States on the left, they've gone one step further. They actually suggest that positive rights ought to accrue not on the basis of individual identity. It's not that you have a positive right to health care. They ought to